I think we are ready to make a start. Good morning, everyone. First off, I'd like to extend, there we go, you can hear me now, a warm welcome to you all this Tuesday morning here at Foster and Partners. Thank you for being here. It's wonderful to have you all with us. And I'm really confident that you will enjoy everything we have in store for you over the next hour. Before we start, I have to say that we're not expecting any fire alarms. So if there is an emergency, then exits are at the rear and the left of the room. On behalf of Manchester United, I want to thank everyone for their contribution to this exciting project. I know we have members of the task force in the room, alongside local and national government representatives and many people who have made this possible. A year ago, Manchester United made an announcement that it was exploring the future of Old Trafford, and the club appointed a task force of local leaders and national experts to help shape the project. And a year on, more than 50,000 people have been consulted and hours of meetings have been held in attempts to maximise the opportunity for the local community and the club. But for Manchester United, this project is much more than creating a fantastic arena. It is all about supporting the government's ambitious growth agenda and maximising the opportunities for regeneration of the Manchester area. Today is a landmark day in the club's history. So without further ado, I would like to welcome on stage Sir Jim Ratcliffe, co-owner of Manchester United, to share the vision.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming. Fairly short from me. We're obviously going to talk about a new stadium. And I think you'll find the next hour fascinating. I've certainly found this process over the last 3 or 4 months fascinating and enjoyable. But if I can set the scene first, in January, the government announced its growth plans for this term, of which there were 3 main pillars. There was the new runway at Heathrow, there was the Oxford-Cambridge Silicon Valley corridor, but thirdly was the regeneration of southern Manchester, Old Trafford, which was the origins of the Industrial Revolution a couple of hundred years ago. And that regeneration scheme, if it proceeds, will be the largest regeneration scheme in Europe. And Rachel Reeves described it as a shining example of our growth plans for the country. Past governments have sponsored a number of these regeneration schemes, but they've all predominantly been in and around London. We've obviously had the Olympic Village, which Seb obviously was very much at the heart of, Canary Wharf, King's Cross, Wembley, O2, a whole series of regeneration schemes, but nothing really. There have been 1 or 2 smaller ones in the north, but nothing of the scale of what we've seen in London. But this will be it'll be the first of this scale in the north of England. So with a project of this scale, a regeneration project of this scale, it needs to have a catalyst or a nucleus, otherwise it just becomes a new housing estate with a shopping centre. And the reason we're here today is that the club, Manchester United, would like to announce that we will underpin the government's growth plans with a new stadium. But it's not just a new stadium, it's a bit more than just a new stadium, because it's obvious that the more iconic or the more extraordinary that the stadium is, the more successful the regeneration scheme will be. And I think a really good example is the Eiffel Tower. Everybody knows, everyone around the world knows of the Eiffel Tower, and I'm sure there are many people here who've visited the Eiffel Tower. You go to Paris, you stay in a hotel, you spend money. We have 1 billion people around the world who follow Manchester United, and they will all want to visit this stadium. You will see the design in a moment, and you can take your own view as to how iconic you think it is. But I think everybody in the world who's interested in football, who's interested in Manchester United, will want to come and visit this stadium. I think it will create enormous value for the north of England and for Manchester. And Oxford Economics, who've done a study on it, reckon that that would be in the region of £7 billion per annum. United is the world's favourite football club, in my view. It's arguably the biggest, and it deserves a stadium befitting of its stature. The Premier League is indisputably the best football league in the world, maybe the best sports league in the world, and it must have a stadium that's at least the equal of the best in Europe. And today it has some great stadiums, but it doesn't have a Bernabeu and it doesn't have a Nou Camp. They're bigger and more impressive, I think, than the stadiums that we have in the Premier League today. The north of England has won 10 Champions League medals, and London has won 2, but London's got Wembley. And also, London has got Twickenham, and London has got Wimbledon, and London has got the Olympic Village. And I think the north of England deserves to have a stadium where England can play football, where we can hold the Champions League final, and it should be a stadium that's befitting of Manchester United's stature. If the government really gets behind this regeneration scheme, then we, with Norman Foster's vision, Norman, in my view, is the greatest architect in the world, we will build an iconic football stadium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. I think we can all agree that it's incredibly exciting and, as you said, will bring huge benefits, not just for Manchester, but the entire region. To speak more about that and the work of the task force over the last year, we will now welcome on stage Seb Coe.
Thank you, and Jim, thank you for setting the scene. When I received the phone call from Jim getting on for about a year ago, it was one of those globe-wobbling moments as a current holder of 4 Chelsea season tickets. Somebody who'd been supporting the club. I was born a few streets away from here. Somebody who'd been supporting the club since 1967. It was really one of those moments. I know that actually I'm not the only one on the task force with a few affiliate challenges, because the supremely talented, hard-working mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, is of course a toffee. And I guess that's my sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek segue into a more important point. And that is the extraordinary and borderless nature of this project. That people from all affiliations, all walks of life have come together, particularly in the guise of the task force, which I'm very honoured to be chairing, to really drive a project that has value way, way beyond the curtilage of a football ground or even a small element of a city. I will go to my grave knowing the most potent social worker in all our communities is sport. But I will also know that if you create around a sporting hub the infrastructure and the ambition to think big, you really can transform a neighbourhood. I don't want to belabour the London story, but I think, Jim, you mentioned it, and it is just worth for a few moments pondering on what was achieved in East London on exactly the same premise. This was 520 hectares of land that was in large part devoid of economic activity for the best part of 60 or 70 years. And around sporting infrastructure, we've created a landscape where we built a new city inside an old city in 7 years. Attached to that are homes, jobs, businesses, educational establishments, and the largest retail development anywhere in Europe for 25 years. And actually, this project in Manchester, built around the reconstruction of a football stadium, has the potential to be bigger. And I think that was the recognition that was dawning on all of us as members of the task force, and I'm delighted that we've got many of those members here today, when we recognised that this really did have the potential to be what we believe it will be, which is currently the most potent and the largest driving force around regeneration and sport anywhere in Europe. We are all going to be in the south of France tomorrow at MIPIM talking in exactly those terms. But the challenge here is extraordinary. And the consultation that has taken place, Jim, I know, is going to talk a little bit more about the work we've done with the fans, but the consultation around local communities is also really extraordinary. Of the 1,200 people that we have consulted and spoken to, overwhelming positive nature of what they see that can be the changes to that community, to jobs, to houses, to visitor values, to the very nature of ambition, particularly amongst young people, in what we know to be one of the hardest pressed areas. So this project is an extraordinary project. It is based around sport, which gives me great satisfaction because the biggest and the most powerful regeneration projects I've witnessed in the last 30 or 40 years that I've in some ways been involved with or actually witnessed are built around sport. And I will be forever proud that sport is the real catalyst for this. The challenges are profound. We don't sit there thinking that we've anywhere near scoped the full project, but it will be in concert with local communities because the most important client group you ever have are not people like me or the chairs or the owners of football clubs. It's those communities that you are looking to create greater and further opportunities. And through sport, that is open, it's applicable, and people understand it. So I can tell you as chair of the task force, I'm delighted to be working with some of the most visionary people that really do understand the Manchester landscape and are driving an ambition that sits in the bucket called big. And that's the way it should be. Manchester United is one of the biggest sporting properties in the world. It deserves a stadium that befits that status. And it is really important, as somebody that was brought up in the north of England, that we absolutely drive those opportunities. It's not about the economics of displacement. It is simply about what we can do through sport to help engage local communities and forever drive up those ambitions. So, Jim, thank you for giving me that opportunity. And I'm delighted to be here today. And thank you to the task force for being here as well.
I think it's probably a good time to show you this video at this moment. Proud Mancunian and world-renowned architect has recorded this. Lord Foster for us. Have a little look.
This has to be one of the most exciting projects in the world today. It starts with the most famous football club in the world, 1 billion followers globally. So it starts with the fans. And it starts with the idea of making something which is so intense, it brings you close to the pitch. Acoustically, it cultivates the roar. As you move away from the stadium, it's not a fortress surrounded by a sea of cars. It's open, and it's contained by an umbrella that harvests solar energy, harvests rainwater, but it's protective, and it encloses arguably the largest public space in the world. It's welcoming, it's open, it's at the very heart of a new neighbourhood. And then it's part of the city of Manchester, the fastest growing city in the United Kingdom. A city, again, like no other. It's a powerhouse, steeped in history. Trafford Park was the industrial heartland of the nation, a heritage which I have a personal connection to. My father was a factory worker at Metropolitan Vickers. And then the three masts, the Trident, visible from 40 kilometers, 200 meters high. So this becomes a global destination. Normally, a stadium would take 10 years to build. We half that time, 5 years. How do we do that? By prefabrication, by using the network of Manchester Ship Canal, bringing it back to a new life, shipping in components, 160 of them, Meccano-like, and then we rebuild the Old Trafford station, and that becomes the pivot, the processional way to the stadium, welcoming and at the heart of a new sports-led neighbourhood. It's walkable, it's well served by public transport, it's endowed by nature, it learns from the past, it creates streets, it's a mixed-use mini-city. So what makes a global destination? What makes something so special? It's teamwork. It's the best brains, the civic leaders, the owners, the consultants, the engineers, the architects, the fans. The list is so long. It's a team effort. That is the heart of the success of this project.
Thank you very much to Norman Foster for that video. What an inspiring film that is, and clearly shows the size and scale of this project. The ambition and vision is clear, and after watching that and listening to both Jim and Seb, I'm sure everyone in the room is excited about what can be achieved in this next phase. And to hear more about how we can deliver this ambition, I would like to welcome Sir Jim back up onto stage along with Seb and Manchester United CEO Omar Berrada. Welcome, Omar, as well. Thank you guys for joining me up on stage. Well, that's the best place to start, Jim. That is incredible. I'm sure you've seen it so many times, that video, but it's still inspiring every time you do see it. And it has been a journey to get to this point. Tell us more in detail how you arrived at this decision.
Well, it just started from the point that we needed a stadium which befitted the stature of Manchester United and Manchester United. Obviously, there's a degree of bias because I was brought up in Manchester. I've always been a fan of Manchester United, but I think it is the greatest football club in the world. It's certainly the most well-known football club in the world, and it needs a stadium of that stature, I think. It's more challenging, obviously, to build a stadium of 100,000, but I think the UK needs a stadium of that sort of presence, and the north of England, I think, is the best place to build it. And I just think it will become recognised throughout the world. Yeah. And at the end of the day, that will also help Manchester United, obviously.
The design is absolutely incredible. Seb, of course, you've mentioned it before. You led the task force on the project and you produced a detailed options report to the club and to local government executives. Can you talk us through the process of that and how you arrived then at the conclusions of the report?
Yeah, in simple terms, the task force represents all that is good in Manchester. It's across the business community. It's clearly the political leadership of Manchester and the executive teams. We've got 2 vice-chancellors from local universities. We've got people who are really steeped in urban planning, but have also held us all and the club to a very, very high set of standards. I made the point just a few moments ago that the one thing that is often overlooked is that the most important group of people that you are ultimately responsible to are, yes, obviously the fan base of any sporting organisation that you're seeking to make adjustments to, but also the community that you're putting that in. Neighbourhoods, people, networks. And so we did a lot of work with the fans, and actually the chair of the Manchester United fan group is on the board, Duncan. But we also went out of our way to really understand what local communities were saying. And I can tell you, I'll put a bit more meat on the bones, we surveyed over 1,200 people in different groups and very carefully identified as people that really this project would have an impact on. And the overwhelming response was everything from carbon footprint through to green spaces, through to meaningful, sustainable jobs, housing, the creativity around a second and third generation business base, and the recognition that the area could really be turbocharged through the focal point being the football club and the ambition of the task force. I hope I'm not speaking on behalf of the task force today in a way, but I think every one of us would agree that we just got more excited as the project developed and the ambition got bigger, and the recognition that we had a real responsibility to create and carve out some options that would survive when the rubber hit the road.
Well, it looks amazing, as I said. And Omar, thank you for joining us on stage. How important is this project for the future that you and your team are building at Manchester United?
Yeah, very important, clearly. It's our ambition, as you heard, is to have the best football teams, men and women's, playing in the best stadium. And I would add, the most iconic football stadium. As you know, we're working very hard to get our finances in order and in the best position possible so that we can invest both on the talent in the pitch as well as our infrastructure. So we've started that with the project in Carrington, which will be open this summer. It'll be a state-of-the-art training facility. But back to the stadium, a new stadium as part of the wider regeneration project for us would be a game changer. As you know, we have the biggest stadium in the Premier League, but we still can't accommodate for all the fans that want to come in because we have the most demand. So we'd like to be able to build a 100,000 capacity stadium to accommodate all the fans, to give them the best experience, to create the best atmosphere for our fans and for our players, and also to give opportunities to our partners to be able to integrate their brands and their products in a way that's quite meaningful. So all in all, I think this will make a massive difference for the club. Very excited about it.
Certainly. Thank you, Omar. Jim, do you have an idea of timeline at this stage? Lord Foster speculated that it could be halved. How do you achieve that? How's it done?
I think there are two comments to make on timeline. The first one is that it starts with a discussion with it depends how quickly the government get going with their regeneration programme, because we underpin a regeneration programme, and it's a fundamental part of the government's commitment to regenerate that area. So in a way, it depends how quickly the government. I mean, I think they want to get going quite quickly because they want to see progress in this term. So I'm assuming that will go well and it will go quickly. The second part of the answer is that it will be a modular build. There'll be an immense amount of work for the local people of Manchester, but the modules which you heard Norman Foster talk about means that we can build the stadium much more quickly. So there are yards in the world which specialise in building very large structures which are then shipped to locations around the world. And we have an example of that in Antwerp at the moment, where we're building probably the largest petrochemical facility that's been built for the last 50 years. And it's been built in Abu Dhabi and Indonesia and Thailand. And the components are being shipped in, and they weigh 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 tons each. And they come in by ship, and then they're wheeled in on these extraordinary sort of vehicles with a lot of wheels. And we will do the same thing. And the thing that allows us to do that, of course, is the Manchester Ship Canal. If we didn't have the Manchester Ship Canal, we wouldn't be able to do that. So that halves the time. I think normally if you were building a stadium of 100,000 brand new from ground up in an area that also needs to be regenerated, it's a 10-year project. But I think if we get going with the government, and I know they're enthusiastic to get going quickly, then I think it's a 5-year project, not a 10-year project. It's got those two provisos.
It's amazing. Omar, clearly there's still feasibility work to do, but at this early stage, how do you think the plans can be financed?
Yeah, as you say, it's still quite early, and also as a PLC, we can't speculate too much about the funding. But what I would say is the new stadium as the centerpiece of the wider regeneration project is a very attractive investment opportunity. So we're quite confident that we'll be able to find a way to finance the stadium.
Okay, thank you, Omar. Seb, clearly there's a massive opportunity, not just for the club. You've all touched on it, for the community and the region. Can you talk more about the economic impact of the project?
Yeah, I can. The one point that I would make, it wasn't the toughest negotiation with Jim when he asked me to do this, but one of the things I really wanted to make clear at the beginning is that I wanted to really, and the task force was very keen, to make sure that we were unlocking economic, social impacts that went way beyond the curtilage of the football stadium. Jim's right. If you have if you're not careful, then you basically only have a new stadium and the rest becomes a housing project. But the interlocking parts here are really important. And one of the best examples of that is the work that we're currently doing about moving the freight yards from one side of the stadium. That's not just for ease of access and allowing us to optimize the curtilage of the land. It also frees up everything from housing opportunities, business opportunities. It moves freight off passenger routes in that part of the northwest, commuter routes as well. And it's really important because the work that Oxford Economics have done for us has really identified, and we really pushed them on this, that we wanted this also to have a regional impact, both in supply chains and all the sorts of things that you have to have together, the operational integration that goes into the development of a site like that. So simply moving the freight allows us, or allows government to meet its freight targets. It will actually add to the ecological advantage of the local area, certainly emissions as well, and allows us to absolutely tap into and unlock other opportunities like fresh housing and new business opportunities. So that is just one example of why the thinking around the stadium is so much bigger than simply the delivery of a world-class stadium, much that it is needed.
Yeah, it's going to have such an impact on all the people of the north of England, as you say. We do have a special guest by way of a video who's going to explain how important this will be for Manchester and the wider area.
Our common goal on the task force has been to try to unlock the full power of the club for the benefit of its supporters and for Greater Manchester as a whole, creating thousands of new homes and jobs. If we get this right, the regeneration impact could be bigger and better than London 2012. Manchester United could, and indeed should, have the best football stadium in the world. To me, that means one that is true to the traditions of the club, affordable to all with nobody priced out, and setting new standards in the game globally. I believe this vision can be realised, and if so, the benefits for Greater Manchester, the North West and the country will be huge.
Good to hear the thoughts of Andy Burnham. Just before we conclude the questions on the stage, Jim, can you explain why this project is so important to you and the club?
Yeah, I think it's repetition, unfortunately. I mean, I've been a lifelong fan of Manchester United, so I do have a bias, but I do, everywhere I go in the world, I meet Manchester United supporters. Irrespective of where I am, there are always Manchester United supporters. A year or so ago, we crossed the border, having done a rather arduous trip across the Gobi Desert. We crossed the border from Mongolia to China in a tiny little dusty town, and we were the first Europeans to have entered China on that border since the lockdown in COVID, and they were not interested in looking at the passport. The only thing they wanted was to talk about Manchester United, and we were in the middle of nowhere. So, in my view, it is the world's favourite club. It is the world's biggest club. And I think because this is biased, I think it's the world's best club. It's obviously had a different period for the last 12 years, but it deserves to have the finest stadium in the world, in my view, and that is very much my objective in building a new stadium, that it's the most iconic, it's the biggest, it's the most iconic, it's the most recognisable stadium in the world. I think that will hugely benefit Manchester United, but it will also hugely benefit that region, which obviously I'm very close to. It is where the world discovered manufacturing. The Industrial Revolution started in southern Manchester. Old Trafford is where... I mean, the reason Old Trafford is built where it is because the workers could walk to the ground. There was no public transport 150 years ago. So historically, it's a very significant part of the world. It is run down today. So I think it's a hugely important regeneration scheme. And I think it needs to be underpinned by the world's most iconic sports stadium, which I think, if you feel like I do, I think that's what Norman Foster and his colleagues here have delivered very successfully.
Thank you, Jim. Before we finish the stage element of the event, I want to introduce just one more final video capturing the exciting potential of this fantastic project.
Manchester, a city, a stadium, a skyline, risen together. Manchester and United, forever entwined. Youth, courage, success in our blood. A glorious history, a future to be written. Where workers once grafted, a new landmark will rise. A new theatre for dreams to come alive. A design inspired by the Red Devils' trident. A modern take on our industrial roots. 100,000 fans, united as one. A place for glory, a place for pride. A sea of red, the loudest crowd. A majestic arena where history and future collide. A public space, a focal point, a catalyst for renewal. Full of hope for our fans and community. A new home for United. A new place for Manchester. A new future on familiar ground.
Another inspiring video for us all. I'm sure we can't wait to see that vision become a reality. Before we end, I want to say thank you to our guest speakers, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Omar Berrada and Seb Coe, and of course Lord Foster and Andy Burnham for joining us by way of video. A big thank you must also go to Foster and Partners for hosting us this morning in this beautiful space. Finally, you've already seen glimpses of the concept which Foster and Partners have created, but now you're all going to have an opportunity to look in more detail at some images and models of what the stadium and surrounding district could look like. Nigel Dancy and his team at Foster and Partners will be on hand to talk you through the plans. So without further ado, Nigel and team, please reveal all.
Thank you very much indeed. You can see you've been looking at some black boxes for an hour or so. We're going to unveil, these are some of the models that we have made that we would like to explain to you. And then also behind the white sheets around the room, there are a whole series of images that we have developed over the course of the last few months. I'd like to say that we have had the best time and the most exciting experience working with Jim and the Manchester United Club and all of the other people in the task force. We have something special. We've tried to turn a stadium inside out. Usually they're very much inward looking. and we try to open it up and create a series of covered spaces, which we think is appropriate for Manchester. We know the city very well. We know that it rains 132 days of the year, and the idea of providing some form of covered space is something that we thought was kind of important. And you'll see on the models a larger scale master plan, which is what Seb's been talking about, which shows that there's a sports community, a mixed-use community, new public transportation, new streets and avenues built that will connect to the new stadium and connect it back into the city of Manchester. So I would like you, if you'd like to get up out of your seats and come and look at the models, so we can try and explain them to you with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Well done, Helen.
That was. I'm still on my.